The night my family quietly erased me wasn't loud, it was precise. A single sentence at dinner, delivered without emotion. We need your space. You'll be out by New Year's. No argument. No hesitation. Just a clean cut. Like I was overgrown fabric they were trimming away. I walked back into the cold room they called the garage. Sat on the cot I'd been downgraded to. And felt something I hadn't felt in years the moment a man breaks. Not from anger, but from clarity. Because what they didn't know was that removing me wouldn't free up space. It would collapse everything they were standing on. And it already had. When people hear the word family, they imagine warmth, connection, a built-in safety net. I used to think that too before I learned that some families don't function like nets. They function like webs. They look delicate, intricate, and harmless until you realize you're the insect caught in the center. My name is Aaron Blake, and for most of my life, I didn't understand my role in my own home. I knew I worked harder than everyone. I knew I was dependable, but I didn't know I was being cast in a part long before I was old enough to read the script. I was the strong one, which is really just code for the one we can burden without asking. My older sister, Danielle, was brilliant in her own way, sharp-tongued, quick-witted, and terrifyingly good at getting people to give her exactly what she wanted. My mother treated her like a prodigy who had simply been born into the wrong family and needed all our sacrifices to reach her potential. And then there was Evan, the younger brother who floated through life like he'd been issued a permanent hall pass. Charming, oblivious, self-appointed creative genius. And then there was me, the middle child, but also the structural support beam. Growing up, I wasn't encouraged, I was utilized. If Danielle needed rides to debate club, I was the chauffeur. If Evan needed help building a school project, I ended up doing it. If Mom felt overwhelmed, I was the emotional sponge. I was taught that saying no meant I wasn't living up to my responsibility as the man of the family. It didn't matter that I was 16, or exhausted, or studying, or grieving my father's sudden heart attack while everyone else fell apart and I stayed functional. That's the thing about being labeled the strong one. No one checks if you're actually okay. My father was the only one who ever really saw me. He wasn't perfect, far from it, but he understood duty, sacrifice, quiet integrity. Before he died, he told me once in the garage while we changed a tire together, "You're the kind who holds the house up, Aaron. Just make sure they don't build the whole damn thing on your back." I laughed, thinking he was being dramatic. I was 14. I didn't understand architecture, literal or emotional. Not yet. After his funeral, it was like someone had flipped a switch in the house. Mom became brittle, clinging to Danielle's ambition like it was a life raft, convincing herself that raising a future star was her new purpose. Evan pursued hobbies that cost money we didn't have. And I became whatever void needed filling. Bills, chores, lifting heavy things, handling emergencies, everything slid quietly into my hands. People assume this kind of dynamic happens gradually. It doesn't. It happens fast. The moment you prove yourself useful, the moment the adults realize they can lean on you and you won't break because you never complain. In high school, I skipped senior trips and parties because Mom needed help around the house. In college, I chose EMT work because it paid well and allowed me to pick up overtime. I never said out loud that I was choosing jobs based on the utility they provided for the household, not myself. When I finally earned my paramedic certification, my mother didn't congratulate me. She said, "Good. That means we'll always have someone who can handle crises." Not your crises. Ours. Over time, I became fluent in a language no one ever taught me. The language of silent responsibility. If the washing machine broke, I fixed it. If the freezer started making noises, I found a way to afford a repair. If my mother's utilities needed covering, I worked double shifts, and they all treated it like gravity constant. Invisible, unquestioned. When Danielle and Evan struggled financially, they simply moved back home. No discussion, no plan, no apology. And somehow I ended up rearranged. My bedroom became Danielle's home office, then Evan's lab for filming tech reviews. By the time both of them were settled, the only place left for me was the garage. Mom told me it made sense. You're hardly home anyway, and you're strong enough to handle the cold. Strong enough. That phrase followed me around my whole life like a curse disguised as praise. But the truth is, I didn't resent them at first. I genuinely believed helping was what family did. I convinced myself I was needed, that my usefulness was a kind of love language. But love without acknowledgement isn't love. It's labor. There was one person who consistently reminded me of that: my grandfather. Henry Blake, Dad's father. He lived across town in a small duplex that smelled faintly of cedar and old books. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his words landed with the weight of an oak tree. You know your worth, right? He'd ask over coffee. I'd shrug. He'd sigh. You give too much. One day, they won't know how to stand without you. He wasn't warning me. He was predicting the future. Grandpa Henry was the only adult in my life who treated me like a person, not a utility. He taught me how to wire a lamp, change my oil, negotiate without apologizing, and most importantly, how to leave a room without abandoning myself. But even he underestimated how deep the roots of family obligation can grow. The older I got, the more I felt the invisible strings tightening around me. Expectations disguised as gratitude, manipulation disguised as tradition, guilt disguised as love. Danielle used to joke, "You're the reliable one, Aaron. You don't break." But inside, I was absorbing hit after hit quietly, dutifully, like a load-bearing wall absorbing pressure it was never built to handle. By the time Danielle and Evan moved back home 6 months ago, that pressure became a fortress around my life. Every decision I made, from my job shifts to my bank account, was tethered to keeping the house functioning. Because if I stopped, everything would collapse. And they wouldn't blame the collapse on how much weight they'd loaded on me. They'd blame the wall for failing. The sad part, I didn't realize how deep the erasure ran until that Christmas dinner when Danielle claimed the garage, the last square foot of space I occupied. That moment didn't introduce the injustice, it simply exposed it. It revealed the family dynamic for what it truly was. I wasn't a son. I wasn't a brother. I wasn't even a roommate. I was infrastructure. And no one thanks the foundation of a house until the moment it shifts. Things didn't unravel all at once. That would have been merciful. Instead, the pressure built slowly, creeping into my life the way cold air seeps into a drafty room, quiet, persistent, bone deep. After Danielle and Evan moved in, the entire house shifted around their needs, like it was built on hinges, only they were allowed to move. Danielle's business calls overtook the dining room. Evan's filming equipment consumed the living room. And the garage, my garage, became both my bedroom and the overflow storage for whatever packages they didn't feel like opening yet. Every week, another box appeared beside my cot. Ring lights, microphones, clothes Danielle wanted to haul for her channel, gadgets Evan needed for reviews. I had to turn sideways just to walk to the washing machine. The worst part, they didn't even see it happening. They stepped over my shoes like they were stepping over clutter. They talked about me as if I were downstairs listening through the vents rather than standing 3 feet away. They treated my schedules, my fatigue, my responsibilities like background noise. If I ever came home early from a shift, Danielle would glance at me and say, "Oh, you're here," like I was a ghost materializing unexpectedly. Mom acted relieved, not that I was safe, but that I could help bring in groceries or move heavy furniture. It wasn't hostility. It was entitlement sharpened into habit. And habits become cages long before you realize you're locked inside. One night, after a 14-hour shift, I walked into the kitchen to grab water. Danielle and Evan were at the table, laptops open, whispering over spreadsheets. They didn't stop when I entered. They didn't even look up. Then I heard Danielle say it. We need to figure out how much we can rely on him financially. I mean, he's basically covering most of Mom's living costs already. We just need to formalize it. Formalize it. Like I was a recurring subscription they were trying to upgrade. Something in my chest twisted, not anger. Not quite. It was the sensation you get when you finally identify a smell that's been lingering for months. Recognition mixed with disgust. I was holding a glass of water. My hand tightened around it. I didn't speak. I didn't call them out. I didn't demand an explanation. Because I already knew the truth. This wasn't new. This was just the first time they said their quiet logic out loud. After that night, requests escalated. Mom began handing me medical bills without a word, just sliding them across the table, like restaurant receipts. Danielle left envelopes on my cot labeled urgent. Evan sent me spreadsheets of projected expenses for family upkeep. As though I'd volunteered to be the treasurer of a house I didn't even get to sleep properly in. Every month. The numbers grew. Every month. My savings shrank. And every time I tried to take a day off, the universe punished me. Something broke. Someone needed help. Someone had a crisis. Someone needed a ride. A loan. A favor. I began to notice something else: the way they praised me in public. At church, Aaron is so dependable. At family gatherings, he keeps us together. To neighbors, we don't know what we'd do without him. It sounded sweet. It wasn't. It was the kind of praise you give a tool. Useful, reliable, replaceable the moment it cracks. Things reached a new level when Mom started making comments about my paycheck. You're single. Honey, you don't have dependents. It's natural you help more. You're so good with money. Aren't you glad you can take care of us? She said it with a soft smile, loving. Almost tender. But her love had strings. Thin as silk, but strong as steel. Every compliment was a rope tightening around my throat. And then came the moment that crossed a line so sharp it carved itself into memory. It was a Thursday morning. I had a rare day off. I'd planned to sleep in my first uninterrupted rest in weeks. But at 6:12 a.m., the garage door yanked open, jolting me awake. Danielle stood there, dressed like she was going to a photo shoot. Sorry, she said. Not sounding sorry at all. We need the floor space. I'm shooting a new series, and the lighting is better in here. In my room, I asked, voice groggy. She blinked slowly. Aaron, it's the garage. Then she snapped her fingers, as if signaling a crew. Evan stepped in behind her, carrying softbox lights. My mother shuffled in with a makeup bag. You can nap later, she said gently. Let them work. Nap. Later. I'd been reduced to an inconvenience occupying square footage. I stood barefoot on the concrete, watching them unload equipment where my bed should have been. Danielle even draped a velvet backdrop over the cot, using it as a prop. That was the moment it clicked: they weren't tightening the strings. They were pulling them. Hard. And I was done pretending the rope wasn't around my neck. But even then, I said nothing. Because saying nothing had been my survival skill. I thought silence protected the peace. I didn't yet understand the truth. Silence doesn't keep peace. It only keeps you in pieces. The pressure was rising. Their expectations were ballooning. My boundaries were dissolving 1 inch at a time. And somewhere in all of that chaos, a line was crossed, so casually they didn't even notice. But I did. And the moment I saw it, really saw it, a quiet thought settled into my bones with the force of gravity. If this continues, I won't survive my own home. Some people imagine breaking points as explosions, voices raised, doors slammed, rage boiling over. Mine wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, surgical, and executed with the kind of intention that leaves no room for misunderstanding. It happened 3 days after the garage studio takeover. I came home from a double shift, 20 hours on my feet. 3 emergency calls that involved more blood than daylight. And 1 kid who didn't make it. I was hollow, exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix. All I wanted was to collapse on my cot for 10 minutes. 10 minutes of silence. 10 minutes of warmth. 10 minutes of being a human instead of a medic. But when I opened the garage door, my cot wasn't there. The entire space had been emptied. The blankets, the small metal shelf I kept my few belongings on, the plastic bin, with my uniforms gone. In their place was a full filming setup, tripods, ring lights, a branded backdrop with Danielle's channel logo printed in glossy neon, and boxes of PR packages stacked neatly where my bed used to be. At first, I thought I had the wrong garage. That's how surreal it felt. Then Evan appeared behind me, holding his camera like it was royalty. He didn't even look up when he said it. "Oh yeah, we needed the whole space. Mom, put your stuff in the side yard." The side yard, the patch of gravel next to the trash bins. I walked outside, and there it was. My entire existence stuffed into black garbage bags and stacked beside the recycling like it was destined for pickup. My uniforms were tossed on top, still wrinkled, still smelling faintly of antiseptic and adrenaline. My work boots were half buried under a collapsed box. My toothbrush was lying on the ground like something scavenged from a stranger's luggage. Rain had started while I was at work. Everything was damp. Danielle stepped out onto the porch, arms crossed, looking annoyed that I had discovered the scene before she had time to spin it. "You can move that later," she said. "We're filming at 5. Move that. That meaning my life." I stared at her. She didn't flinch. She didn't look embarrassed. She didn't look guilty. She looked inconvenienced. And that was when something inside me snapped, not like a twig, but like a steel cable pulled past its limit. I suddenly understood the truth, with perfect clarity. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't thoughtlessness. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was intentional. They had removed me from the garage because they wanted to erase the last physical square foot in that house where I still existed. They had pushed me out piece by piece, until all that remained was the part where they pretended they didn't notice. But they noticed. They always noticed. They just didn't care. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I didn't beg them to see me. Instead, I gathered what was left of my belongings, soaked, heavy, humiliating, and loaded them into the trunk of my car. Danielle watched like I was blocking her driveway. Mom finally appeared in the doorway. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic, but not enough to save anything. "You should have told us you needed your things. We figured you'd manage." Manage. The Blake family motto. You can suffer as long as you do it quietly. I closed the trunk, got in my car, and drove away from the house without looking back. Because in that moment, the last piece of my denial died. They weren't going to break me. They already had. And now I was done building them a life at the cost of my own. I didn't go far that first night, just to a cheap extended stay motel off the freeway, where the walls were the color of lukewarm oatmeal and the heater rattled like it was dying. But it was warm, and for the first time in months, the warmth belonged to me. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, staring at the banking app. The glow on the screen felt like a spotlight aimed straight at the truth I'd been avoiding. I took a breath and logged in. There they were. The transactions, the auto payments, the invisible architecture of my life. I scrolled slowly. $1. $150 mortgage, $420. Utilities, $980. Medical supply company, $230. Prescriptions, $160. Miscellaneous charges that no one ever asked about. All drafted automatically. All drafted from my accounts. All still active like obedient little soldiers, marching off to a war I didn't believe in anymore. But the real shock came when I expanded the details for the mortgage. The loan wasn't under my mother's name. It wasn't under Danielle's. It wasn't under Evan's. It was under mine. 5 years ago. When Mom had panicked after Dad died, she'd pushed a stack of papers toward me, telling me they were routine and needed my signature because the bank required an adult present. I was 20, grieving, exhausted, and I trusted her. Instead, I'd signed myself into legal ownership of a house I didn't live in, didn't control, and wasn't welcome in. My chest didn't tighten. My pulse didn't spike. There was only clarity. Clean, cold clarity. They had built their comfort on my name, my credit, my work, my future. And somehow, they still believed I owed them more. I opened the settings and hovered over the Manage Payments tab. The motel heater groaned, struggling to keep up, blowing hot air across my face. Then with a calmness I didn't recognize, I started shutting down the system. Step 1. Cancel autopay for the mortgage. Step 2. Cancel the pharmacy deliveries. Step 3. Revoke my card on all household utility bills. Step 4. Remove my name from saved payees. Step 5. Change the passwords. Every time the confirmation box asked, "Are you sure?" I clicked yes without hesitation. It wasn't revenge. It was release. Next came the emails. I drafted them one by one, cold, professional, not a single word wasted. To the mortgage company, please be informed that automatic payments from my account will discontinue effective immediately. Future responsibility lies solely with the listed occupants of the property. To the pharmacy, deliveries must be reassigned. I will no longer be the point of contact or payer. To utilities, remove my information from all accounts. I am no longer responsible for the address. No emotion, no explanation, no apology. Just facts. The last email I sent was to Danielle and Evan. Effective today. I will no longer be financially involved in the household. All recurring payments previously covered by me have been terminated. Any future obligations are yours to manage. Do not contact me for support. This decision is final. Aaron. I sat back. The heater hummed. Somewhere down the hall, a couple argued in Spanish. The world felt strangely weightless, like I'd been carrying a boulder for so long that setting it down made me forget where my spine actually was. And then my phone buzzed. Grandpa Henry. I hadn't told him anything yet, but he knew. He always did. His message was simple. Proud of you. Boy, come by this weekend. I've got a warm meal and a bed for you. I exhaled. A long, slow release that felt like the first real breath I'd taken all winter. Someone saw me. Someone understood. Someone had been waiting for me to choose myself. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was quiet. Steady. Grounding. The way real support feels. I lay back on the motel bed, staring at the ceiling. The sense of identity I'd lost over the years was stitching itself back together, piece by piece. Not through anger. Not through grand gestures. Through boundaries. I hadn't destroyed them. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't punished. I had simply removed the scaffolding that kept their world upright. If they collapsed, it wouldn't be because I pushed. It would be because they never learned to stand. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel responsible for catching them. I didn't expect the confrontation to happen at the airport of all places. But disasters rarely choose poetic places, they choose practical ones. Busy ones. Public ones. Places where humiliation spreads fast because there are too many eyes to witness it. It started with a voicemail, then another, then another. By the time I clocked out of my shift and checked my phone, I had 12 missed calls from Danielle, 9 from Evan, and 3 from Mom's facility. My stomach didn't drop. I didn't feel dread. I felt the same thing I feel before a major trauma case, a calm, sterile focus. Their messages were frantic, incoherent, but the words that came through clearly were, "Come fix this. You need to get here now. They're saying the tickets are invalid." Tickets. I didn't know what they were talking about until the last voicemail played. "Aaron, it's Mom. Your sister booked us on a family trip, but the card was declined at check-in. They're saying the hotel reservation is under your name. You need to fix whatever mistake you made." Mistake? Mine? Of course. I didn't reply. I just drove. The airport was chaos, incarnate, lines curling like snakes, luggage zipping over tiles, families shouting, babies crying. I spotted them near the check-in counter, standing like an island of crisis in the middle of normal life. Danielle was mid-argument with a visibly annoyed airline supervisor. Evan was pacing like a furious CEO in a startup documentary. Mom sat in a wheelchair looking small, her oxygen tank softly hissing beside her. The moment they saw me, it was like a dam broke. "There he is," Danielle barked, pointing as if dragging me into court. "He's the one responsible for this mess." People turned, cameras even lifted. Good. The airline supervisor stepped toward me, relief all over his face finally. Someone who wasn't screaming. "Sir, are you Aaron Blake?" "Yes." "There's an issue with the payment information on the family's package trip. All reservations were placed under your name and card, but the payment methods have been declined." I nodded. "That's correct." Danielle whipped around. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said calmly, "I canceled all payments 2 weeks ago." A ripple moved across the group. Shock, offense, confusion, all fighting for dominance on their faces. "You what?" Evan shouted, like he'd caught me stealing his wallet. I didn't answer him. Instead, I noticed a familiar face approaching from the escalators. Jonathan Hale. My lawyer, the one Grandpa Henry insisted I hire once everything began unraveling. Jonathan walked with the confidence of a man who'd already read the ending of the book. "Mr. Blake," he said, shaking my hand, "I have the documents you requested." Danielle blinked. "Documents? What documents? Why is there a lawyer here?" Jonathan opened his briefcase like he was unveiling a crime scene file. Bank statements, transaction histories, mortgage records, the deed to the home, all signed by Aaron, all paid by Aaron, all under Aaron's legal responsibility, for 5 years. Mom's face drained of color. "That can't be right," she whispered. "Your father left us a pension." Jonathan's voice remained neutral, almost gentle. "Ma'am, the pension ended 5 years ago. Every deposit since then came from your son." He laid out the papers on the check-in counter. People stared. Staff stared. My family stared. The truth was no longer invisible. It was printed in black ink and double-stamped by a financial institution. Danielle's mouth opened and closed like she was gasping for air. "You forged this," she sputtered. "There's no way he doesn't have this kind of money." Jonathan raised a brow. "Are you accusing your brother of bank fraud?" A small crowd had begun forming. Someone even whispered, "Is this a TV show?" I let Danielle rant. Let her unravel. Let her claw at denial like it was her last oxygen source. Then I leaned in, speaking low but sharp. "You lived in the house. You used the electricity. You ate the groceries. You accepted the medical supplies. You thought they came from Dad. They didn't." I stepped closer. "They came from me." Evan shoved a hand through his hair, muttering curses. "So, what, you're punishing us for relying on you?" You're abandoning. Mom, you're heartless. No, I said, voice steady. I'm done being used. Mom reached toward me, tears pooling. Why didn't you tell us? Why would you hide something like this? You never asked. I replied, not once. Jonathan cleared his throat and pulled out one final document. This is a legal notice of withdrawal. Aaron is no longer financially tied to the home or its debts. Court approved. Final. Danielle snatched the paper. Her eyes scanned the lines. Her jaw dropped. You removed yourself without telling us. That's what you did to me. I said. You removed me from the house without warning. From my room. From my own life. The airline supervisor approached awkwardly. Is there something you'd like to do about the reservation? Danielle stared at me like I was the failing engine causing the plane to crash. Well, fix this. I exhaled slowly. No. Just that. One syllable strong enough to break our family's spine. Danielle looked like I'd slapped her. Evan let out a humorless laugh. Mom started crying softly. Jonathan stepped in with perfect timing. My client will not be participating in the trip or financing it. Any further harassment will be documented. Danielle exploded. Harassment? You're choosing him over your family. I looked at her, then at Evan, then at Mom. No, I'm choosing me. And for the first time, the words didn't feel selfish. They felt like oxygen. I stepped back, hands in my pockets, grounding myself in the moment. The noise of the airport surrounded us, the rolling luggage, the overhead announcements, the buzz of strangers too busy to care about our implosion. Perfect. Because this wasn't a private ruin. It was a public collapse of a myth they'd built around themselves. That I existed to serve them. I turned to Jonathan. We're done here. He nodded, closing his case. As I walked away, Danielle shouted something I didn't quite catch. Evan called me ungrateful. Mom sobbed my name, but their voices sounded distant like echoes in a place I no longer lived. I didn't turn around. Not once. At the sliding doors, sunlight spilled onto the floor. Warm and sharp. I stepped into it feeling lighter. Taller. Real. For the first time in my adult life, I walked away from my family and toward myself. Consequences don't arrive like avalanches. They arrive like slow-moving tides, inevitable. Steady. Reshaping everything they touch. In the weeks after the airport implosion, the Blake household became less a home and more a collapsing ecosystem. Without my silent subsidies rolling in like clockwork, reality finally showed its teeth. The mortgage defaulted first, then the utilities, then the unpaid medical supplies stacked up like overdue library books. Danielle tried negotiating. Evan tried blaming. And Mom tried praying, but none of those were accepted forms of payment. The house was sold at a loss 2 months later. Danielle moved into a friend's guest room. Her influencer era taking an abrupt hiatus once she had to confront life without ring light luxuries. Evan retreated to a cramped studio apartment, suddenly discovering how expensive real life was when no one else cushioned the fall. And Mom, she ended up in a state-subsidized facility. But here's the important thing: she was safe. Not abandoned. Not neglected. Just finally receiving care from professionals instead of a son who had spent years patching holes in her world without tools. I made sure her paperwork was clean. I made sure her medical needs were covered through the correct channels. I made sure she had a comfortable room and a nurse who treated her kindly. I just didn't visit. Not out of spite, but because healing sometimes requires distance. The way a broken bone requires immobilization. If you keep touching the injury, it never mends. In my own life, something unexpected began to grow quietly at first. Like moss taking root on a stone, finally exposed to sunlight. Peace. Real. Steady peace. My apartment stayed warm. My fridge stayed full. My back stopped nodding in that familiar ache of suppressed panic. And something else happened, something I didn't anticipate. People started reaching out. Not family. People who had watched me nearly disappear under the weight of everyone else's expectations, paramedic coworkers, neighbors, even old classmates who'd glimpsed pieces of my story through whispers or social media. One night, a fellow medic named Cruz sat across from me at a diner after a rough shift. He hesitated before speaking. My sister's going through something similar. Her family treats her like a walking wallet. She doesn't know how to get out. Can I ask you how you did it? I didn't plan to become anyone's roadmap. But pain, once processed, has a strange way of turning into guidance. We talked for 2 hours. Not about revenge, not about punishing his sister's family, but about boundaries, survival, reclaiming identity. He left lighter. I left surprised. A week later, another coworker asked. Then a neighbor. Then a man from my gym who'd overheard pieces of Cruz's story. And suddenly, I realized something. My suffering had become a language other people understood. A reference point. A warning sign. A compass. I wasn't carrying their burdens. I wasn't setting myself on fire to keep them warm. I was simply sharing the blueprint I wish someone had handed me years ago: how to step out from under a collapsing roof without guilt crushing your chest. Every conversation, every person who left feeling less alone, it stitched something closed inside me. The more I helped others set boundaries, the more whole I felt. Not useful, not needed, not exploited. Whole. Sometimes healing doesn't look like forgetting the past. Sometimes it looks like transforming it into something that prevents future damage for yourself and for others. My grandfather, wise in the way only old men who've seen too much can be, summed it up over coffee one Sunday morning. You carried them for too long. Aaron, now you're helping people learn to walk on their own legs. That's not revenge. That's growth. He was right. I don't hate my family. Hatred requires energy. I'm done spending energy on things that don't build me. Now, I spend it on people who are trying to climb out of their own emotional basements. Parents who want to love better. Friends who want to choose themselves. Sons and daughters who think sacrifice is the only way to earn a seat at the table. I teach them the lesson I learned the hardest way possible. Love without boundaries isn't love. It's erasure. And I'm done disappearing. I don't know what the future holds, but I know this much. I'm standing in my own life now on solid ground, facing forward. No longer a foundation for people who never learned to build anything themselves. And for the first time, I'm not cold. If this story resonated with you or reminded you of someone you care about, feel free to share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear where you're listening from and what part connected with you the most. Your stories matter here. This story is a fictional work created by the Kitchen Tables team for entertainment purposes only. It's not based on real individuals or events. And it isn't meant to encourage any specific actions.